for joining us for tonight's webinar. Burnout in youth sports, early specialization is not so virtual. Office of Alumni Affairs. Since we're virtual, please use any technical or glitches that may kind of like what we are having. If you experience issues with video or audio, just like that, connect button on the top of your screen to get back to the webinar. A quick note, our recording tonight's webinar will have a replay available on our website tomorrow. Also, if you have questions for Dr. during his presentation and conversation, please drop them in the chat. We will have time for Q&A through his presentation. We'll get more of an open dialogue. Dr. Spellmon. So tonight we're beginning a 5-part series to play that takes a look at what's important for athletes and their parents. For the next months, the series will be for parents of young athletes. Topics include related concussion, orthopedic injuries, nutrition and hydration, health, and young. For tonight's, we're excited to have Calvin Jr. Dr. Spellmon is a physician for UAB and an assistant professor in the UAB Medicine. Here it is, Doctor of Medicine from Meharry Medical College. This time, I would like to welcome Dr. Spellmon to the web series. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you, and hopefully his ironing out. If he wants to drop something in, I'm going to run up and start the webinar again. Everything should be okay. My fingers are so. Dr. Spellmon, the platform is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining on this evening. I hope I share something here this evening that helps you all, and most importantly, helps our athletes that love sports and want to continue to compete at a high level for many years to come. And again, as you stated, this is more of an open dialogue. So if you guys have questions as I talk, please feel free to interject and ask questions as we go along, and they can also further the conversation. So as he stated, I'm going to talk about essentially early specialization in youth sports, and one of the results of those things is burnout. And notice I said early specialization. Basically, what I mean by that is it talks about specialization in sports in kiddos 12 years of age and younger. At some point in most athletes' lives, they do get to the point where they want to specialize in one particular sport. Essentially, it ends up being a sport where they feel as though they are the best at, and or the sport that they love the most. Obviously, when athletes reach the professional level, outside of Deion Sanders, Bo Jackson, most athletes end up just playing one sport for the majority of their career or all of their career. However, that should not be the case in young athletes. And so when you talk about specialization in sports, what exactly does that mean? So typically that means when you're playing a sport year-round or equivalent to 3 seasons out of a year. And technically, a child should not be playing one sport year-round for more than 8 months, if that much. Typically, in addition to playing one sport year-round or for several months out of the year, the other issue that comes into play is the number of hours that they are dedicating to their sport per week, which also leads to burnout as well as injuries. It is so common in today's era that we have a significant amount of kids who face burnout, injuries, as well as physical and emotional distress at a young age, and it all stems from them playing too much of one sport and spending too many hours on one sport. Essentially, there's roughly around 60 million kids these days, children that are playing sports, and out of that 60 million, probably a third are specializing in too early in sports. Typically in girls, it more correlates to the number of hours per week they're spending on the activity. And with girls, you typically look at activities such as cheer, gymnastics, swimming, volleyball. Those are some of the more common sports that you face that in. In boys, it not only deals with the number of hours that they're spending, but also the singular nature of the sport. And typically, again, cheer, gymnastics, as well as baseball are really common. The other issue is that these kids are not only playing one sport, but then they're playing one sport on multiple teams. So I've had kids in my clinic, they'll be on 3 travel baseball teams, or they'll be on 4 travel soccer teams, or 3 AAU basketball teams. And it's just an astronomical amount of time that they're spending toward one sport, in addition to the amount of money that parents are having to spend as far as resources trying to get these kids to and from these different teams and sports. They are also not just playing the sport, but on top of that, they're hiring trainers. So they're getting trainers to train for the sport, practicing with their teams throughout the week, and then playing in multiple tournaments and games. And again, that is too much to even think about, let alone to do it. I had one young athlete who blew out his elbow. I mean, he was like 12 years old, looking to have Tommy John surgery. And this kiddo was on a pitch count. So he was on a pitch count, but he was on 3 different teams. So he may pitch a certain amount for one team and they shut him down. Then he went to another team and pitched another, and then went to another team and pitched another game, until eventually he couldn't do it anymore because his elbow blew out at 12 years old. The other thing that they face, in addition to the injuries, is when you start talking about burnout or overtraining syndrome, which is actually a condition. So essentially, this is when they are training or participating in one activity too much. They start to get chronic muscle injuries and chronic muscle strains. They start to get mental and physical fatigue. They also start to have personality changes, and their overall performance declines. And this is a big issue that we're seeing in athletes younger and younger and younger. When I was growing up, it was like a badge of honor to be great at multiple sports. And we didn't train. We just went outside and, played basketball, or went outside and played football in the neighborhood, or played baseball, or played whatever ball or sport we could get our hands on. And it was great to be great at all of them. I don't see that as much anymore. I see more kids thinking that, and not just the kids, honestly, it's the parents as well, thinking, if my child dedicates their life early to this one particular activity, it will get them to the professional ranks. And essentially it's crazy, because roughly around 58% of parents feel as though if they have their child specialize at an early age, that it will increase their chances of go on to play in their sport professionally. When honestly, what really increases their chances of is getting an injury and burning out at an early age. We tend to, the way I equate it is, if you take too many vitamins, you don't get more healthy. You have golden pee. You just pee it out. Essentially, if you spend too much time training or participating in one activity or one sport, you don't develop correctly. And so there is something to say about a child playing multiple sports for several years, because they develop attributes and skills and strength and development of different muscle groups that essentially will help them later on when they finally do decide to lock down into one sport. But if you negate to do that training at an early age, you will lose that advantage. I tend to see a lot of pressure that these kids face, and it's sad because most of the pressure actually comes from their parents. And obviously they get pressure from coaches, and some of these athletes, especially these kids that are really type A personalities, they put pressure on themselves inherently as well. But the most I see it from is actually the parents. And it's sad, because I've had kids who will exacerbate or exaggerate injuries, or mimic symptoms for a long period of time, in order to not just come out and say that either they don't want to play the sport anymore, or they're not having fun with the sport anymore, or that they fear that they are going to let their parents down, simply because they don't want to come out and tell them or disappoint their parents about playing one sport too much. Matter of fact, I had a gymnast, and she was 9 years old, and she would come in, I would say roughly every 6 to 8 months, and it was a different injury. Like, it'd be her wrist or her knee or her leg, and there were times when she would want to go in a cast or a boot or a brace or something, so that she could have something physical to show her coaches and her parents, where they wouldn't bug her about trying to compete through the pain or participate through the pain. All because, again, she was a high level gymnast at 9, and they had more aspirations of her going to going to the Olympics or developing and, participating in college more than she did. I just tend to think that kids should be kids, and they should enjoy sports, as many of them as they want, for as long as they can. One of my favorite athletes is Mookie Betts. So obviously we know about Mookie Betts' his endeavors on the baseball field. Is in my opinion, one of the greatest athletes to ever play baseball. But if you go look at Mookie Betts in high school, he was an MVP of his in basketball. He also was the player of the year, I believe it was, in 2010 in bowling. And also, if you go and look at most, I would say the majority of professional athletes, go and look at their bios from high school and grade school, and it will list several sports that they participated in, not just one. Again, they eventually decided to just do one, but again, if you go and look at their bios, they participated in several sports. Even just a personal history of mine, like I tried to do football, basketball, track, and I grew up in Texas. And again, I took one hit in football, so that essentially, I knew that sport wasn't for me. And then I just didn't like running all day, so I said track wasn't for me. But I did them all up until I would say my sophomore year in high school. When I just started participating in just basketball. But even now, like I still love to go and play, flag football or softball or do other sports. And I think it's fun. But kids these days don't see it that much. And another issue I see is going back to the training component. I see kids all the time with trainers, and they're training them for certain sports. And it's crazy because half the drills that they have them doing has nothing to do with the sport that they're playing. So it's just wrong. I see them lifting weights and at an early age trying to compete when their bones have not even fully developed, and they're just in the weight room lifting all wrong technique, too much weight, and again they get injured. I see kids pushing themselves at a young age. And again, I'm not opposed to a kid being competitive and wanting to be the best, but it's to the detriment of their physical health. Taking different prescription medicines or to a certain extent illegal medicines, using all these energy drinks and pre-workouts and all this stuff. These are preteens or early onset teenagers who are trying to push themselves at that age to be great with the aspirations of going to play professionally. And then it's sad when it all comes, shattering down because they've gotten injured because they essentially pushed their bodies too early and they specialized in the sport too young. So I stress to parents, number one, kiddos need to play as many sports as they can for as long as they can. Number two, they should not be participating as far as the number of hours a week for practice and training. They should not be doing that more than their age. So if a kid is 10 years old, they should not be spending more than 10 hours a week on a particular activity. Again, kids need about, I would say, 2 to 3 months of rest per year away from competitive sports in general. So I always use my example to my kiddos when I'm in clinic talking to them. I said every professional sport, football, basketball, baseball, it doesn't matter. They all have an off season. So when the season ends, it's over. Typically, most of those guys go and they rest, they go rejuvenate, and they take several weeks, a couple months off before they, start ramping back up their training. And so I asked them, if my professional athletes have to take time off, what makes you think you don't and you're a child? And so it's not even just the physical break that they need from sports. They need the mental break from sports. And again, the more that they do that, the better they will be now and long term. It's hard because I think my children understand my points that I make more so than the parents, and it's hard when I hate to take kids out of sports and out of competition, but my job at the end of the day is to protect children. It's my job to protect these athletes, and so I always take the pressure off them and say, hey, if it gets to the point where I feel like they are scared to speak up, I'll speak up for them. Like, hey, I'll give them that out. So, hey, if you don't want to play this particular sport, or if you don't love this sport anymore, if you want to try something different, that's okay. If you are hurt, or if you are tired, or if you need a break, that is okay. And if adults need something to equate that to, if you worked your job 365 days a year without a break, how long could you fare like that? Or how long could you sustain that without you breaking. I don't care what activity it is. Even great things, nothing too much of anything is bad. And so it would seem like it's common sense, but it's happening more and more and more. And the injuries that we're seeing in these kids, we didn't see before, and we didn't see these injuries in adults. We used to see them just in adults, but now we're seeing them in children, and it's a direct correlation to the increased number of kids that are specializing in sports at too early of an age. And so I always implore my young athletes when I see them, even if they do have a favorite sport, to try other sports. I had a kiddo in clinic last week. It plays football. So I'm like, hey, he's like, do you want to play other sports? I don't like any other sports. I said, okay, well, what other sports have you played? Well, I played basketball. I said, you don't like basketball? No. I said, okay, well, what about soccer? Well, I've never played soccer. Well, how do you know you don't like it? What about tennis? What about golf? What about swim? What about, XYZ? Never tried anything else. And so I implore parents to expose kids to as much, as they can. And obviously I understand that certain social situations may not allow you to expose your kids to as many things as you would like, but as many things as you can, just let them try different things and see what they gravitate toward, and see what they like. There's a ton of benefits of just playing youth sports in general. The exercise, obviously, but the relationships that they build, the confidence that they build, and like I mentioned earlier, the skills that they develop from playing multiple sports can carry them when they do finally decide to play one sport or one activity. But it also just teaches them things in life that I think you cannot learn in other avenues of life. And so, it's hard to get across to some people because they just really feel as though they have to spend all their time on one sport in order to be great at it. But that is absolutely not true. Matter of fact, there's a ton of athletes now, and I can think of like Akeem Olajuwon, who didn't even start playing basketball until he was until he was older in age. He was a soccer player, and the skills that he learned from soccer helped him with his footwork in basketball. Akeem is one of the most fundamentally sound big men that ever played the game, and he didn't even start playing basketball until he was older. It's several athletes like that who played different sports growing up, and they finally Giannis Antetokounmpo. He played. His dad was a professional soccer player, so he wanted him to play soccer. He was soccer at first, and then he finally started playing basketball. And again, those skills transitioned to help him become a better basketball player. And that's the type of thing that parents overlook. The skills that they develop in other sports, the muscle groups that they build, it translates and it helps them when they finally do decide at whatever age to specialize. But again, I wouldn't even start thinking about specialization until they, well into their teens. But again, as many sports as they can play for as long as they can, I would let them do it. Do you guys have any particular questions?
Yeah, we've got questions coming in, and I do want to say, can you hear me better?
Yeah,
Are we good? All right, success. It just took a Wi-Fi reset. Who would have known? You mentioned Mookie Betts, and I did a quick Google search on things. Mike Trout, baseball, basketball. Tom Brady, baseball, football. He played both in college, even at University of Michigan. Same with Pat Mahomes. He played those two sports, but in high school, he also threw in basketball. I looked at two of my favorite players. Joe Mauer out of Minnesota played football, had a scholarship to go to Florida State, but he played baseball, might be in the Hall of Fame, and he played basketball. Mm-hmm. Ryan Sandberg, my all-time favorite, Hall of Fame baseball player, had a scholarship offer to be a quarterback at Washington State, but here he goes to the Cubs. So all of these players, and even Michael Jordan, greatest basketball player of all time, played baseball. So are there sports that tie well with each other that may work? Because all of this whole list, baseball, basketball was a common factor, even for the football players.
I don't think there's any per se scientific data, but in my personal opinion, one sport I feel as though all kids should try to some extent, I believe, is soccer. I believe soccer helps with their footwork. I feel as though it helps with their conditioning. I feel it helps with their coordination. And I feel like it translates well to other sports. It also helps, I think, them just being aggressive, and having confidence when they do play other sports. I think, again, when they play different sports like a baseball, basketball, football, wrestling, things like that, I think, again, it just helps develop their total skill set. And so when they do decide to play one sport, I just think those skills tie in well with whatever sport they play. So, and like you mentioned, Michael Jordan, my favorite athlete ever, his first love was baseball. It was not basketball. It was baseball. But again, I think the skills that he learned in baseball, even just the competitive nature, him playing against brothers, things like that, it helped him to transition. But again, I don't think there's like one particular sport that you have to play to be great at another sport. I think just doing multiple sports in general, whichever sports you decide to do, I think will help you regardless in the long run. And again, like I said, growing up, when I grew up in my era and generation, if you were great at multiple sports, I mean, like having a Letterman jacket in high school with multiple sports on there, I mean, that was like a badge of honor. Like you walked around with your head held high like that, you know? I just don't see that as much anymore. And so, but no, it just blows my mind how often kids come into the office and they only play one sport. And again, it's not just playing one sport. It's playing for the school team. It's playing on 2 or 3 like travel ball teams or AU teams or soccer teams. My volleyball players, they play on they elite teams as well as their high school teams. It's just so much. And on top of that, like I said, they have trainers. Like we couldn't even afford that when I grew up. Like your training was you better go outside and play. And when the street lights come on, you come back in the house. But I have one of my athletes like have baseball practice for school, then it has the travel ball practice, then has a pitching coach, and then has a trainer to work him out. I'm just like, one, where do you find the time for all this in addition to just being a kid? Like, you know, doing your homework, talking to your friends, you know, just having a life. It just blows my mind when I see it. It's so often. It's so often.
You talk about playing multiple sports, and you know, people that are regular to our webinar series see the medals over my shoulder. They're not mine. They're my wife. She played basketball, volleyball, ran track.
Mm-hmm.
She took the summer off. She was in Iowa, so they could play 4 sports, and they can go seamlessly around the year. What is the appropriate amount of rest that an athlete needs so they aren't necessarily going 365 days? Do they have to take a couple of weeks off completely to kind of recuperate?
So, number one, I feel as though they need at least 2 or 3 days off per week. That's number one. Even in season, in competition, I think they need 2 or 3 days off per week. And to further expound on it, essentially it goes back to recovery. So just let's put this like an example. Let's say if you go to the weight room and every day you do upper body. I mean, you do bench press every single day to the max. You're going to hurt yourself. Like you will hurt yourself. Essentially what happens when you lift weights, you break your muscles down. But when they build back up during the recovery phase, they build back up stronger. If all you do is break down, you'll never get to the point where your muscles build back up. You're going to injure yourself. Same deal with sports. Like if you're practicing going hard 5, 6, 7 days a week, doing the same thing over and over and over again, on top of practicing multiple hours, then training, then having your individualized workouts, it's just it's a ticking time bomb. It's a matter of time before you injure yourself. So I think they need to have minimum 2 days off per week to rest and recover. And then again, I go back to, I think they need at least 2 or 3 months off total in a year. I think they need about 2 months off after a competitive season. I think they need at least 2 months off just to rejuvenate. Again, not just physically. I think they need to physically and mentally rejuvenate prior to doing another competitive season. The other point I want to make is too, when they do play sports or multiple sports, they need to focus on one sport at a time. So if it's football season, focus on football. If it's volleyball season, focus on volleyball. Then when the next season starts, basketball, soccer, whatever, then you focus on that. When that's over, then you can focus on the next one. But a lot of kids, they overlap. So they playing football, they playing volleyball, then they playing on the club volleyball, then they overlapping with cheer and gymnastics, and then they want to do the band. Like it's too much. And so they need to focus on one sport at a time. And then once that competitive season is over, they can go to the other. But then again, once all their competitive seasons end, they need a break. In addition to that, even if they are playing on, even when they do decide to specialize, if they are playing on, like they play a sport, you know, if they're at the right age and they decide to play a sport year round, so let's say they're playing baseball. Well, I don't like them being on 3 travel ball teams. So be on one team at a time. Like, you don't need to be on 3 travel ball teams at one time. Again, it's just too much. So again, I equate it, if we want to look at it as an adult, if you're working 3 full-time jobs at one time, how long can you do that, right? You know, you're going to burn out eventually too. If you had to work 6-7 days a week, I'm going back to residency, I guess, here, but if you're working 6-7 days a week all the time and you don't get a break or you don't get a day off, you don't get a vacation, what's going to happen? You know, and I think COVID was obviously, I believe, one of the worst things that happened, especially to kids in sports and schools and, you know, in this country to a certain extent. But one of the best things that happened or that came out of COVID was we had to rest. Like, they shut the country down. And what came out of that was rest. So people started seeing that, hey, I needed this. Like, I needed to rest. I needed this break. And obviously, like I said, I'm not taking away from all of the heartaches and deaths and the bad things that COVID caused, because it was awful. But the only one thing that we saw was that people were home more with their families. They were able to be around their families more. They were able to sleep more, rest more, rejuvenate. They also were able to find ways to do their job that they could work from home, or they can still be productive and not having to stress themselves or kill themselves out by commuting hours to work and doing certain things. Rest is not a bad thing. I was joking with my friends the other day, you know, we all kind of getting up there in age. Things that we used to consider punishments, they're a blessing now. Like, if I can take a nap, oh, that's my day is made. You know, if I can get to bed early, oh, I'm ecstatic. You know, 6-7 o'clock, if I'm in the bed, that's a great day for me. And, you know, that's the stuff we used to frown upon or get mad at it. If I don't have to go out on weekends, I can get home early. Oh my goodness, I'm in heaven. That's the stuff we used to think of as a punishment. But again, the resting, I cannot stress enough, rest and recovery. And as I tell, like, my seasoned athletes or my older athletes, or the ones of us who still consider ourselves athletes and trying to play different sports, the difference between us now and when we were younger, we don't recover as fast. So we have to even spend more time putting in the work to recover. Think about LeBron James. You know, we don't all have that luxury, but he spends roughly $2 million+ per year to keep his body in shape. And it really focuses on his recovery from activities, from his sport. And so we really have to focus on that. And again, when kids specialize too early, they don't get that luxury to recover, and then they get injured.
What are your thoughts on weightlifting at a young age? You see on social media 3, 4, 5-year-olds doing things. Safety?
I think that's child abuse.
Yeah.
So personally, I don't like kids lifting heavy weights until their bones are developed, number one. Number two, lifting heavy weights in general, especially like bodybuilding and things like that, essentially like you creating a ton of muscle breakdown in your body, which can lead to injuries to your kidneys and too much, you know, rhabdomyolysis and things like that, which is too much muscle breakdown. And so I hate it when kids are lifting too. I had a kid on my office in middle school the other day. His back, essentially, he has the back of an old man because he's in a weight room with his friends trying to squat 300-400 pounds, and he's in the 7th grade. And they think this is what's needed in order for them to get on the field and to impress their coaches and their friends. And so I hate kids lifting weights when their bones are not developed. You know, there's nothing wrong with sit-ups, push-ups, pull-ups, jump rope, you know, stuff like that, calisthenics, and they'll be fine. Secondly, the issue is too, especially when you're talking about like middle school and high school, the development of those kids are so, the range of that is so wide. So you can have a freshman in high school who looks like a senior, and you can have a senior in high school who looks like a freshman. But then the coaches would just put out a workout and let all these kids go to work. And I know how it goes. Like, the testosterone is running. They got the music blasting. They got the pre-workout in their system. They got the energy drinks flowing. And if one kid over here lifting 400 pounds, I want to try to do it too. And you weigh 50 pounds and you trying to lift 500. Like, it's just crazy. And they end up getting hurt. So I think, number one, they need to wait until their bodies have matured or close to mature. I think number two, when they do start lifting weights, I think the first thing they need to focus on is proper lifting mechanics, because that is overlooked so much. And then they need to make sure that they slowly increase their weight. You don't have to just start heavy. Like, start out light, more reps, make sure your mechanics are great. And then as your body gets stronger and your body matures, you can increase the weight from there if need be. But again, there is no study that shows that you being able to squat 500-600 pounds will help you be a better basketball player or a better football player. Like you need to be able to control your body, have strength for your body, have strength for your frame, and be able to perform the sport. But again, I know some of the most scrawniest people in the world are some of the greatest athletes. If you go back and look at Steph Curry in college, still one of the greatest shooters to ever play the game, arguably the greatest shooter. Steph Curry wasn't a stocky guy, but he'll give you 30 points real quick, and you couldn't stop him. To this day, you can't stop him. Reggie Miller, if you go look at Reggie Miller, he wasn't the strongest guy in the world, but again, he will give you buckets really quick. So again, there's no studies that show that you have to be, this workout phenom in order to be great at sports. But again, that's what we push, and we push it too early in kids. And so I hate seeing kids lift weights when their bodies have not even matured. And the last part of it is, if a kid is still going through puberty, still going through maturity, and they start lifting weights early, the frame that they even lifting for is not going to be the same frame 6 months from now. Like it changes so constantly as those kids are growing, and their bodies are constantly adjusting. And so there's no point in them trying to build up this frame when 6 months from now you're going to have this frame. Again, I'm all about exercising. I'm all about calisthenics. And I'm all about when they get to that point to lift weights if you need to. But again, proper mechanics in the right settings, they need proper supervision. And it needs to be tailored to their body frame. And so, that's my personal opinion on it. And there are studies that show how many injuries that kids have lifting weights too early and lifting wrong and in the wrong environment.
How do you balance the burnout and overtraining with the pressure to be in a particular sport early enough? For example, my child can't play baseball at 12 because he didn't start at 5 or 6.
It's hard because these kids, it's easier, in my opinion. I feel like it falls back on the parents, right? Because if I let my son eat chocolate cake all day long, he will eat chocolate cake all day long. It is my job to tell him, no, that is not good for you. You cannot have this chocolate cake. You need to eat your vegetables. You need to drink water. You need to, that's my job. So if you have a kid that are practicing that amount of hours per day, playing that particular sport year round, and they get injured, I blame the parents, because it is the parents that are allowing them to do so. And so, they get overtrained. Yeah, they get burnt out. And again, it's mostly the pressure from the parents, whether it be the parents feeling like their kid is the next phenom, whether it's a child not wanting to disappoint their parent, whether it's the parent trying to live out some childhood dream that they have through their kids. It's usually because of the parents. And so these kids that come in with overtraining syndrome and burnout, again, they usually will have injuries or pain from injuries that doesn't correlate. And they usually have a lot of mental health issues, not only from not being able to play the sport because they're injured, but also because they're depressed, that they feel as though they let their parents or their coaches or their teammates down. Like there's no need for a child to feel that pressure at that age. Again, unless you're making millions doing this particular activity and this is what you do for a living, you should not have pressure playing youth sports. That's a time to have fun, be around your friends, be around your family. And I tell people all the time, playing youth sports, middle school sports, junior high sports, high school sports, like you'll never get those moments back. Like that's the only time you'll be able to play sports with your childhood friends. Like once you play in college and beyond that, like you're getting players from all over the world coming and you trying to form a relationship. Like playing middle school, youth, high school, those are the times you can play sports with your friends since child. Y'all can grow up together playing sports if y'all want to. You can play sports with your sibling then if you want to. That's not guaranteed when you go to college in the professional ranks. But again, that joy, that love, that passion is stolen, because they get injured, because they're overtraining, because they burnt out, because they lose their love, their joy, their passion for the sport. And again, I feel like that falls back on the parents, because I feel as though the parents are the first line of protection for those kids. And then I'm the next line if need be. But if any respect, I can become that first line. I had a parent the other day, her kid is on the baseball team, and the baseball team is equivalent to the Bad News Bears. But he is the best pitcher they have. So this kid is 12. This kid, they only played 5 innings. This kid pitched 75 pitches. 75 pitches. And he already had an elbow injury in his elbow a year prior to this. And my first thought is, if that was my child, no way in world would I have let my child pitch 75 pitches. That's number one. Number two, how as a coach can you put a kid on that mound? And that was the only win of the season, matter of fact. That was the only win on the season. How could you even ask a child to do that, knowing that that's going to put their child in danger? And lastly, what I tell parents is too, if something happens to their child, if that child blows his elbow out, you know what most coaches are going to do? They'll go to the next player. You know, when that kid goes on to, leaves junior high, goes on to high school, you know what that coach is doing? They're coaching the kids that's there now. They're not worried about the injury that was caused in 7th grade. Now that the kid can't play high school sports, they're not worried about that. So parents need to be the first line of defense for these kiddos, because they will keep going and pushing themselves as much as you let them in most cases until they get to that point of overtraining and burnout. And then the situations that can come from that, it's a slippery slope.
Brandon asks, a heavy hitter, in your opinion, what role does athletic identity foreclosure play in youth sports and burnout?
Say that again. How do you bounce over? What was the question?
What role does athletic identity foreclosure play in youth sports and burnout?
So he is going to have to, what does he mean by athletic identity and closure?
Brandon, if you want to drop that in there and explain that a little more, we'll circle back. So hold off on that, Dr. Spellmon.
Okay.
What about cross-training during the rest break? So you have, the 1-2 month optimal time off. How about doing activities like dance, Pilates, yoga, different things like that?
So I think cross-training is excellent. But I think it should not come at the sacrifice of rest and recovery. And again, cross-training, I feel, is best done when they play different sports. So by that, I mean, let's say if they play in baseball, where during baseball season, play baseball, train for baseball. Then let's say if they want to play basketball up there, when it's basketball season, play basketball, train for basketball. Let's say if they want to play soccer up there, then play soccer, train for soccer. If they do that, they are inherently cross-training. But again, they should not be playing baseball and then cross-training for another sport at the same time. Because I have that as well. Because some kids will have a favorite. They may play multiple sports, but they will have a favorite sport. So they may play basketball. Let's say their favorite sport is soccer. Well, they'll still play. They'll show up at basketball practice, but then right after basketball practice, before basketball practice, they were at soccer practice, or they were doing soccer training with their personal trainer. I don't like that. Again, if they play multiple sports and dedicate and are dedicated to their sport at the time, they will inherently cross-train just by doing that. They should not cross-train while playing other sports.
How do you feel about playing 2 sports in a single season if you only do each twice a week? So soccer twice a week, baseball twice a week, overlapping.
I don't like it. Again, I still think it's too much. And again, I think you stressing the body. So the other question I would have to that is, why? Like, why do you have to do that? Like, because there are different seasons. So if they in baseball, they love baseball, let them play baseball when it's time for baseball. When it's basketball, let them play time. Because again, if you do that, and I've seen kids like that as well, when you do that, you're not going to give 100% to you can't give 100% to both sports. So it's like, it's like my granny used to say, you can't be half one foot in the church and one foot out the church. Like, you either all in or you're not in at all. And so if you playing 2 days basketball here, 2 days baseball here, you're not giving your all to one sport. And I think in that respect, long term, I think you're cheating yourself. So I think if you're on basketball, you focus on all your skills and energy on basketball during that time. And then when it's baseball season, you focus on all your skills and energy on baseball. I think long term, the skills and the training that you develop from each sport will benefit you once you decide to specialize in one sport, when I feel like the kids are old enough and ready for that. But I do not think kids should cross-train while they're playing another sport. I do not think sports should overlap. And if they do get to the point where they are specialized in one sport, I do not think they should be on multiple teams at one time.
Brandon elaborates a little bit with the question that we had before. And I will say Brandon is a college athlete. So he has seen different things.
I got you.
In your opinion, what role does athletic identity foreclosure play in youth sports and burnout. Athletic identity foreclosure refers to the phenomenon where an individual strongly identifies with being an athlete to the exclusion of other aspects of their identity. In other words,
I got it.
Self-worth and self-esteem is highly dependent on the performance as an athlete.
I got you. That's actually an excellent question. I think if you go back to like looking at psychological things and things like looking at the mentality, I think that actually starts in childhood, right? Because I think kids, especially when they going back to when they specialize too early, when they play in one sport, I think they're valued by parents, by coaches, by friends, by siblings, by relatives, I think are placed on them. Their value is given to them based on how they perform in sports. And especially if they identify a kid at a young age, they feel as though it has potential to be great at it. Oh man, if they have a great game, oh, you're the greatest thing, you're the best athlete ever. This is what you should do. This is your life. Da, 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 da. If they have a bad game, oh, you suck. Da, 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 da. And so I think that starts a lot when they're young. And then I think the kid starts to internalize that. So knowing like, hey, if I do great at this sport, if this is who I am, they're going to love me. They're going to care for me. They're going to be there for me. If I don't do well at this sport, they're not going to love me. They're not going to be there for me. They're going to hate me. And I think they start to internalize that. So personally, I think that their value should never be placed on sports. So I tell my daughter all the time, and when she was competing in karate, when she was playing basketball, when she was doing whatever, I said, Kayla, you cannot score enough points to make me love you anymore. You can score 0 points and I'm not going to love you any more or less. Like there's nothing you can or cannot do that's going to make me love you any more than I do. My love for you is unconditional. It is eternal. There's nothing. I'm proud of you. When you wake up in the morning just for being my child, I'm proud of you, right? And so I think that starts at home at a young age, just letting kids know their value is not placed in sports. Their value is not placed, even if you want to get further than that, it's not placed in making A's or B's. It's not placed in, what they do. Their value is placed in being who they are as a human. And so I think we have to really retrain our athletes. And I think we have to train them at an early age that, playing sports is great. Doing great in school, but doing good in school is great. Being great at your job is great. But that does not make you who you are. That does not determine your value. Like you should be valued because of who you are. And I think that's a hard thing for some athletes to digest when their whole life they've been told different. So I think if an athlete, especially a collegiate athlete, gets to that point, I think they need to just take a step back and realize that, number one, I don't care how great you are at the sport. Father Time is undefeated. So there will come a point in your life where you have to give up that sport to that extent, to that level, right? And when you do, you have to be able to be okay with who you are. And so talking about, rest in peace, one of the greatest players that ever played the game, Kobe Bryant. I personally feel as though as great as Kobe was on the court, what he was starting to do off the court was far greater, right? I think athletes need to find a purpose in life outside of sports, right? I think sports, it should be an enhancement to a child or anyone's life. It should be an enhancement. It should not be their life itself. I think that it should, and I think, again, that's where it comes to putting too much pressure on these kids at a young age. Even professional athletes, and I think we as fans forget that as well. These people are human. So we should not place value on them based on how high they can jump, how far they can throw a ball, how many points they can score. Like these are people with families and lives and situations outside of what we see on TV. And I firmly believe no athlete should place their worth on whatever sport they play. And so I think, number one, it starts with parents at a young age. I think coaches need to reiterate that to their players. I think win, lose, or draw, good or bad, when athletes play the game, once that sport is over, you got a life outside of sports. And that's another reason why I think that these kids should not play sports and spend so many hours a week on sports, because they need to find hobbies, activities, joys. They need to find purpose in other areas of aspects in life other than sports, because at some point they're not going to be able to play that sport, especially to the level that they want. Like I still play, rec basketball here and there, but there's no way I definitely do not play basketball to the level I did when I was 20 years old. But I still love to play. I love to compete. I love to get out there with my friends. But I understand that once I get off the court, like I still have the family to come home to. Same deal with work. When I get off work, like even though I'm a medical doctor, I don't place my self-worth in being a medical doctor. And so I don't place my self-worth in people calling me Dr. Spellman or people looking at me on the basketball court. That's not where my self-worth is at. Like, I know who I am outside of that. And I think athletes have to get to that point. And I think the sooner and the earlier we focus on that for them, the better.
You mentioned coaching, and I have a question about that here in a second, but I do want to tell our audience, I dropped in the chat, part 5 of the series is mental health and young athletes, stress, eating disorders, and more. And we just touched on that. We just hit the very basic spot of that. We're going to have a whole webinar of that in August. So if you're interested in that, register on that link. So going back to coaches, if you notice signs of burnout, how do you have a conversation with the coach without embarrassing the child or overstepping the coach's boundaries?
Again, this is a personal philosophy, but I feel as though a great coach will notice that, right? And I think a great coach can see when a player is getting overwhelmed or getting burnt out or spending too much time. So if the coach doesn't realize that, though, and as a parent or even as a friend, as a teammate, you realize and you see that in a player, I think the first thing you need to do is the player has to realize that, right? Because a lot of times the players won't. Like, I had a collegiate athlete at one point, and she was training. She was a college athlete, and she was a track and field athlete, and she was training, and she just kept saying the more she trained, the slower she got. And she thought it was something wrong. I mean, we ran tests, we did imaging, we worked her up under the sun. Everything was normal. And I finally had to tell her, sweetheart, like, it's too much. Like, you need to rest. You need to let your body recuperate, and you need to mentally rest. Take a step back, breathe. Your worth is not based on you running a certain time. Like, you will never get this time back in your life. And so I think once the athlete realizes that, again, and I think it goes back to what Brandon was saying, once they realize that their worth is not in whatever sport they're playing, and they have other interests in hobbies outside of their sport, I think it's easier for them to do that. But again, I think if it's a great coach, they'll realize that in their players, and they'll give them the out that they need. Like, hey, it's too much. Take a break, rest, And if they can't, then the parents should say, hey, I think you need to rest. I think you just need to tone it down a bit. Like, take some time away and from the sport and go back. It's like when we used to study for school, like if a concept that I couldn't understand, I just couldn't get it. I'm breaking my neck reading, trying to study, trying to figure out a concept, remember something. I just couldn't do it. I always remember that if I just put the book down, close the book, go to bed, rest. When I woke up the next day, it was like it hits me, like it comes to me. And I think that happens in sports. Like, that's why I go again. You cannot underestimate the importance of rest and recovery. They have to take a step back. You have to not only physically be recovered, but you have to mentally be recovered. And so even at, like, this age when I play sports, I always tell people, like, my mind is willing, but sometimes my body is not able. And so the mind is an extremely powerful tool. If you are mentally fatigued, if you are mentally worn out, your body is going to follow that. Like, you're not going to be able to compete. You're not going to be able to perform. You have to rest, both of them.
And I want to say your daughter's impressed with what you did. She dropped in the chat, good job, Daddy. And then she said this is her daughter. So great job, Dr. Spellmon. It has been a wealth of information. I have 3 now grown kids who played sports, and this would have been fantastic for me, for them when they were younger. I hope the audience grabbed a lot of information, because this is an important topic for kids as the years kind of go, because as you mentioned, things have definitely changed from the time we were youngsters. Thank you so much for taking time out of your night and spending it with an hour with us, despite the technical issues that I had with the Wi-Fi. I greatly appreciate what you've done, and a job well done.
Thank you all for being here.
And a quick reminder, a recording of this webinar will be available on our website starting tomorrow. Tonight's attendees will get an email with a replay link once it's been uploaded. In a moment, I'm going to highlight the other 4 parts of our Push to Play webinar series. But first, we'd like to invite you to take part in this year's National Alumni Society Scholarship Run presented by Viva Health. Come out to the Battery in Homewood this Saturday as we raise money for student scholarships. Our in-person 5K and 10K runs will start at 8. Can't make it? You're out of town? You're somewhere else? You live somewhere else? Register for our virtual option. You can find out more or register at alumni.uab.edu/5K10K. And here's a look at the other webinars in our Push to Play series. We've got 3 of them at the bottom. On top, we have Mischief Manage, but next up is Brainstorming, a deeper look into sports-related concussions. It's not listed there, but trust me, go to alumni.uab.edu/events and sign up for that. It's going to be 7 p.m. on Tuesday, May 23rd. We'll get an in-depth look at why there is so much concern for concussions. For this webinar, we will welcome Dr. Sarah Gold, Dr. Heath Hale, and Dr. Kathy Weiss. Then at 7 o'clock on Thursday, June 15th, come back for Breaking It Down, Common Orthopedic Injuries in Sports. We're going to explore which injuries you should be most concerned with. Dr. Stephen Brown and Dr. Ian McKeague will also share what needs to happen for your kids to heal. And I'll skip back to the May 4th one. That's a fun one. That's Mischief Manage. Has nothing to do with this series. Learn more about Harry Potter and what he can do. Back to the series. On Tuesday, July 18th, Dr. Marissa Bello will be here at noon for nutrition, fueling, and hydration. Find out what we should be encouraging our kids to consume for them to be at their peak while avoiding exposure to things like heat illness, cramps, and overheating. Finally, the one I alluded to just a few minutes ago will host mental health and young athletes, stress, eating disorders, and more. At noon on Wednesday, August 30th, Dr. Dana Watson will be with us as we learn more about the mental health struggles our youngsters may face. Register for these and more at alumni.uab.edu/events. Finally, share your thoughts about tonight's webinar and what you'd like to see in the future. The QR code on your screen is going to take you to a brief survey for you to let us know how we're doing. Once again, thank you so much for joining us for tonight's webinar. And as always, go Blazers.